So in this video, we're going to have a look at stakeholder mapping. Firstly, to revise some of the principles of the mapping process, the analysis process, and then I'm going to talk through a quick worked example just to give you an idea of how we might use a stakeholder mapping tool to determine how we might engage with interested parties. So let's just review some of the things that we're trying to achieve with our mapping process. The first thing is to think about who our stakeholders are. Who are the people who have legitimate claims on how the business operates and what business does? We also might want to think about what their contribution could be. That could be positive or negative, and we need to think about both types of stakeholder there. And we also might want to think about how much influence they could have. Some people will be very interested in an organisation, but actually won't be able to influence it a great deal at all. And the reverse of that is true. Some people will have great scope to influence an organisation, but might not actually have a great deal of interest in doing so. And the purpose of the mapping exercise is for us to be able to think about who we should focus our attention on, and perhaps to start thinking about what we might do in terms of tactics or strategy, if you like. This is a very common sort of diagram that you'll see. On the horizontal axis, you'll see interest. So how much interest does this group of people have in the running of that organisation? And on the left-hand side, that is hardly any or none, right through to we're really interested in what that organisation is doing. And on the vertical axis, at the bottom, it's they don't have any interest in the organisation, through to they are extremely influential and could bring about significant change in the organisation. And we roughly have these four segments then between, on the bottom left there, the minimal effort. Those are people who have very little interest, very little influence. And in the top right there, the engage closely, they are groups of people who are extremely influential and extremely interested. And those are the ones that we need to pay closest attention to. And the other categories there reflect people with great interest but little influence, or great influence but little interest. So what I want to do is just give you an example of this so that you can see this in action. And I've chosen to think about Disney. Hopefully you can see in red, I've inserted some groups of stakeholders into various different parts of this diagram. And I've done this fairly quickly and with some thought, but not a great deal of formal kind of information gathering. And if you were going through this process as part of a significant piece of kind of strategy development, you probably would want to think about how you could get data to inform this process. So let's talk through some of the decisions that I've made here. Let's think about customers first of all. So I think one point to make is that individual customers are interested but not at all influential. You know, if you pay your Disney Plus subscription every month, Disney have some interest in keeping you as a customer, but really if you choose to take your business elsewhere, you're not going to do Disney any damage at all. But groups of customers as a whole are extremely influential. So I split them out into Disney Plus customers and parks visitors. And I've done that really because I think they might react in different ways or have different interests. And that might be something that we would want to think about. So I've suggested here that Disney Plus customers are a little less interested, but a little bit more influential than parks visitors. I guess I've done that partly because of where Disney gets its money from. Actually, the split is relatively balanced between those two groups of people. And maybe the idea that parks visitors will keep going to Disney parks. There's a number of them, there's enough of people who keep being interested to keep those parks busy. Disney Plus, slightly newer, slightly more competitive, maybe they need to, there's more influential there. Media regulators, I put in the minimal effort box. These are people who could exert some influence. Actually, media is only part of what Disney does, so I've reduced their influence on Disney, the kind of corporate entity, for that reason. But on a day-to-day basis, they're not particularly interested. If something terrible happened, if Disney was involved in a really significant case, then of course they would pay attention. But on a day-to-day basis, not very interested. So I put them in that minimal effort box. I've also split out employees. And I've split them into employees and specialist employees. So employees are the kind of regular jobs that Disney will employ people to do, perhaps people that work in the parks, people who are involved in kind of sales functions, that sort of stuff, as distinct from specialist employees who are undertaking maybe highly technical tasks or tasks involved with maybe with CGI or with animation that are much more specialist, much more highly in higher demand, much more training. And I think what we reflect in the positioning on this mapping is the influence. Those specialist employees, because there are fewer of them, they probably demand higher salaries. Disney needs to pay more attention to their interests and to keeping them on board. Frankly, if a few cleaners in a Disney park are upset and choose to leave, Disney will employ some more cleaners. If a whole section of CGI artists are upset with the way that Disney is acting and decide to leave, that creates more of a problem. The last group are shareholders. And like a lot of companies, Disney will be owned by shareholders, people who own stocks or shares in the company. And these are a group of people who have great influence, often particularly the corporate shareholders, the ones that own big stakes in the company, are extremely influential. And they also have a lot of interest in seeing how Disney performs, in making sure that they continue to make a profit year to year, that they continue to grow, that their market share grows, and so on. So that is a group of people that Disney will need to engage with closely. There are many ways of doing this mapping exercise. You may disagree with where I've chosen to place some of these groups. If I did it on a different day, maybe I would put them in a different place. But the point is, by going through this exercise, we start to think about these differences between groups of people. And we might say, well, if we were going to go out of our way to engage with a couple of these groups, which groups would we engage with? And maybe we would be surprised that customers are not one of those groups. This suggests to us that shareholders and specialist employees are the ones that we should pay closest attention to, and that parks visitors, Disney Plus customers, employees are part of a range of stakeholders that maybe we don't need to engage with quite as regularly or in quite so much detail. So it's worth thinking about. It's not a perfect science by any stretch of the imagination, but it is an interesting tool to help us make decisions about how we might strategize and engage with some of those external bodies. Thanks for listening.